Jack had been on many missions before, but none like this. He was a simple engineer, sent to an alien planet to inspect the technology of a new species that had been secretly aiding humanity in its space exploration. The job should have been straightforward: check their systems, report back, and leave. But nothing in the universe ever went as planned. When Jack was brought into the building, everything felt off. The air was heavy with tension, the walls felt cold, and the guard's eyes never left him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. They led him into a small, locked room. The door clicked shut behind him, and he was left. Alone, the only sound being the hum of the lights overhead, Jack wasn't a man who panicked. He had spent years traveling in space, dealing with strange technologies and unfamiliar environments. But this was different. Wasn't sure what was going on, but he could tell he wasn't just here for a simple inspection. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard a soft noise from the corner of the room. He turned, his eyes narrowing. There, sitting in the far corner, was a figure-in alien girl. She was unlike anything Jack had seen before. Her skin shimmered with a faint blue. Glow, smooth and flawless, almost ethereal. Her eyes, dark as space, held a quiet sadness, a depth that made Jack feel as though he were looking into a soul far older than her appearance suggested. Her long hair, silver and flowing, curled loosely around her shoulders. There was an unmistakable strength in the way she carried herself, but also a vulnerability that seemed to haunt her every movement. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Jack's hand instinctively reached for the small tool belt around his waist, but there was nothing he could do. He was trapped in this room, with no way out. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice soft, almost melodic. "You're human," she said, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. Her words were slow, deliberate, as if she was trying to understand him, just as much as he was trying to understand her. Jack blinked. "Yeah, I am. What's your name?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she lowered her gaze and sighed. "They didn't tell you anything, did they?" Her voice dropped, like she was speaking to herself more than to him. "They never tell you anything." Jack was confused, but he wasn't about to let the moment slip by without trying to figure out what was going on. "Tell me what?" Took a cautious step toward her, his eyes never leaving her. "Who are you? Why are we here?" The girl's eyes flickered with something Jack couldn't quite place: fear. Maybe. She looked down at the floor, her hands curling into fists in her lap. "I am Alira," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I am here because I failed." Jack took a seat across from her, still unsure of what was happening. Failed at what? Alira raised her eyes to meet his, and for the first time Jack saw something like fire in them. "I was once a leader," she said, her tone more firm now. "I led my people in a war against an empire that sought to destroy everything we had. But we lost. My people were captured, and now I'm the one they hunt." Jack's heart sank as he realized that this wasn't just a random encounter. This alien girl, this powerful being, was running from something much bigger than either of them. "You're telling me you were a warrior? A leader?" Alira nodded. "I fought for my people. But now I am nothing. It's just another prisoner, locked away like a piece of trash." Ow. Her eyes lowered again, and Jack could see the weight of her words pressing down on her. "I thought I could escape, but they found me. And now, I am here." The silence between them stretched for several minutes, Jack processing what she had just said. His mission had always been about checking systems, analyzing technology, but this was something else entirely. Jack cleared his throat. "So what now? What do we do?" Lyra looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Now, you wait. Just like me, there's nothing we can do." Jack frowned. Alira raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his response. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jack said, his voice more confident now, "we're not just going to sit here and wait for whoever's running the show to decide what happens to us. There has to be a way out." A faint smile touched Alira's lips, but it was tinged with sadness. "You don't know who you're dealing with, human. They're not like anything you faced before." Jack leaned forward. "Try me." Alira looked into his eyes for a long moment, as if trying to decide if he was serious. Then she stood, her movements graceful and fluid. "I can help you. Escape," she said, her voice steady now. "But you need to understand something. It's not going to be easy. I've been on the run for years and no one has ever gotten away from them." Jack stood as well, his resolve hardening. "I've faced worse. I won't leave you behind." Alira's eyes softened, and for a brief second she allowed herself to look at him like he was more than just a stranger. "You're brave. Human. But bravery won't save you here." Jack shook his head. "We'll see about that." For the first time since they had been locked in the room, there was a sense of determination in the air. Alira wasn't sure if Jack had fully understood the dangers that awaited them. But something about his confidence made her believe that, just maybe, this human could help her escape the chains that had bound her for so long. Together, they would try to fight for their freedom, but they had no idea what they were truly up against. The hours passed slowly, each tick of the clock echoing in the quiet room. Jack sat restless, watching Alira as she paced back and forth. Her movements were graceful, yet there was a hidden tension in the way she moved, like a caged animal, always on alert. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but there was nothing to do about it. They were trapped, and right now, survival was the only thing on his mind. "Are you sure this plan will work?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Alira paused, her dark eyes meeting his. "There's no guarantee, but it's the only chance we have." Jack nodded, knowing that he couldn't afford to hesitate. If there was a way out, they had to take it. They'd been stuck in this small room long enough, and Jack wasn't about to wait for someone else to decide their fate. Alira's eyes softened for a moment, and Jack could see the weight of her words pressing on her. "You have no idea what you're getting into," she said quietly. "You think escape will be the hardest part, but the truth is, it's the beginning of something far worse." Jack felt a pang of uncertainty. He had no idea what he was truly up against, but one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't leaving without her. "Tell me what we're up against," he said, his voice steady, trying to keep his own fear at bay. "Who are they?" Alira sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. She had been avoiding the question since they started talking. Now, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "They are the ones who control everything. They are a shadow, a hidden force that manipulates the galaxy from the dark. No one knows their true identity, but they've been in power for centuries. My people, we fought them for years, but we were always outmatched. They have resources, power, technology far beyond anything we can imagine, and they have no mercy." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of power could this force hold, and why had they targeted Alira? "So what do you think they want with us?" "They want to silence me," Alira replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I was once a leader in the fight against them. I was ... I was close to winning, but they found me. They captured me. And now they want to break me." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "They want to make sure I can never lead again. They think that if they destroy me, they destroy any hope for my people." Jack stood up, pacing back and forth. "Then we can't let them win." Alira's gaze softened as she watched him. "I've tried to escape before. I've hidden, I've run, but they always find me. They never give up. And now you're involved too. They'll come for you as well. They don't care about who gets hurt in the process. If we fail, ... it's over." Jack shook his head, frustration bubbling up inside him. "We're not going to fail. We have to do something." Alira was quiet for a moment, lost in thought. "You're brave, Jack, but bravery alone isn't enough." She looked at him then, really looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Jack met her gaze, unflinching. "Not leaving without you. We're in this together." Alira's expression softened, a quiet understanding passing between them. For the first time, she seemed to let her guard down, if only slightly. "You don't know what you're up against. But if you're willing to fight, I won't stop you. Just ... be careful." Jack nodded, his determination only growing. Didn't have time to waste. They had to act, and they had to act fast. If they were going to survive, they had to escape now before their enemies had a chance to stop them. They spent the next several hours preparing. Jack used his knowledge of technology to hack into the building's security systems. He had done it before, and though this place was unlike anything he had encountered, he was good at what he did. Meanwhile, Alira studied the guards' movements, memorizing their routines and weaknesses. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a plan. As the hours dragged on, Jack couldn't help but wonder if they were already too late. What if the guards had already noticed they were gone? What if they were walking into a trap? The fear gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. There was no turning back now. Finally, the time came. Alira gave him a nod, and Jack quickly moved to the console. His fingers flew over the buttons, his heart racing in his chest. He had no idea what he was doing, but he knew that if they were going to escape, they had to move now. The doors to the room slid open, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he thought it was a mistake. But when he looked up, he saw that Alira was already halfway through the hallway, her body tense, her eyes alert. "Let's go," she whispered, and Jack followed her.
Ow.
His steps echoing in the quiet hall. They moved quickly and silently, sticking to the shadows as much as they could. Jack's mind raced, his thoughts moving faster than his legs could carry him. They had to get out before it was too late. But the deeper they went into the building, the more Jack could feel something shifting. They weren't alone. He could feel eyes on them, watching from the shadows. Something was wrong. He looked at Alira, but she didn't seem to notice. She was focused, determined, like she had done this 100 times before. Jack didn't want to say it out loud, but he had a bad feeling. They had just started, and already the danger was closing in. They moved through the dark corridors, Jack following closely behind Alira. His heart raced, and every step felt like it echoed too loudly in the silence. The building, once imposing and filled with strict security, now felt like a maze of shadows. Jack had no idea where they were going, but he trusted Alira. She knew this place better than he did. Her focus was unmatched. Alira's movements were swift and calculated. Her sharp eyes darted around, always alert to any potential threats. Jack tried to match her pace, though it wasn't easy. His mind kept wandering back to the way the guards had looked at him when he first arrived. There was something off about the entire situation. They hadn't seemed like ordinary security. Personnel. They had known something he didn't. And now, as they moved deeper into the building, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay close," Alira whispered, barely looking back. Her voice was calm, but Jack could hear the tension in her words. They reached a narrow hallway, walls lined with strange symbols that Jack couldn't understand. Alira moved past them with ease, but Jack couldn't help but glance at them as he passed. Everything in this place felt foreign, alien, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he was truly prepared for what was ahead. They weren't just escaping from a room anymore, they were running from something far more dangerous. "Where are we going?" Jack asked in a low voice, trying not to make any noise. "There's an exit not far from here," Alira replied, her tone confident. "We just have to make it there before they realize we're gone." Jack nodded, even though the knot in his stomach tightened. Alira had been on the run for years, but this was Jack's first time in a situation like this. His mind raced, trying to process everything. They were both fugitives, now fleeing from forces beyond their control. But Jack couldn't let the fear take over. He had made a promise to Alira, and he wasn't going to break it. They reached a heavy door, which Alira immediately started working on. Jack stood guard, keeping an eye on the hall as she manipulated the lock. His nerves were on edge, every little sound making him jump. He couldn't help but wonder if this would be the moment they got caught. What if they weren't fast enough? Alira's fingers moved quickly, a quiet hum of concentration escaping her. She was in her element, working with precision, while Jack felt like an outsider. He had no experience with this kind of thing, but he had learned to adapt. He knew that if they were going to survive, they had to rely on each other's strengths. Finally, with a soft click, the door unlocked. Alira stepped back, a small but satisfied smile crossing her face. "We're in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack followed her into the darkened room. He looked around, trying to take in their surroundings. It looked like some kind of storage area, filled with crates and strange technology that Jack couldn't even begin to identify. It wasn't much, but it was a place to regroup. Alira took a deep breath, and Jack could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "We don't have much time. The guards will be looking for us. We need to keep moving." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They couldn't afford to stop. Every second counted. They moved through the storage area, their steps quick and quiet. Jack's mind raced, wondering what would happen once they left this place. They weren't just escaping from a building, they were escaping from an entire system that wanted to erase them. Jack had no idea how far they would go, but he knew that as long as he was with Alira, he had a fighting chance. As they reached the far side of the room, Jack heard a faint sound behind them. His heart stopped for a moment as he turned, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was getting louder, closer. Someone was coming. "We're not alone," Jack muttered, his voice tight with panic. Alira's eyes narrowed, her body tensing like a coiled spring. "Stay calm. We can handle this." Jack wasn't so sure. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. He had no weapons, no plan, but Alira seemed unfazed. She moved toward the nearest crate, positioning herself behind it for cover. Orc followed her, pressing his back against the cold metal as he tried to steady his breathing. The footsteps grew louder, and Jack's pulse quickened. He could hear voices now, muffled and indistinct. Whoever was coming, they weren't far off. His thoughts began to spiral. What if they got caught? What if this was the end? Drop a shadow moving along the far wall, figure tall and broad, with armor gleaming in the dim light. The guards. Alira's eyes locked with his. And for a brief moment, Jack saw something he hadn't noticed before, flicker of fear in her expression. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by determination. She wasn't going to let them get caught, not now. She turned to Jack and whispered, "When I move, you follow. Stay low." Jack nodded, his hands clenched into fists. To this kind of danger, but he couldn't back down now. It's not with Alira by his side. Alira moved first, her steps silent and calculated. She ducked behind another crate, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Quiet, trying to make himself as small as possible. His heart raced as they crept through the shadows, inching closer to the exit. But just as they reached the door, a loud clang echoed through the room. "Stop," a voice shouted. Jack's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, everything froze. Alira turned to him, her eyes wide with panic. But Jack was already moving, running for the door. The sound of pursuit was close, too close. There was no turning back now. They had to escape. They had to do it fast. The chase was on. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted toward the exit, Alira just a few steps ahead of him. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder, the guards closing in. There was no time to think, no time to plan. It had to move, and they had to move fast. Alira's pace was swift, her body a blur as she dodged obstacles with ease. Jack, still trying to keep up, pushed himself harder. His mind raced, thinking of every escape route, every possibility. But there was nothing left to do except trust Alira. She had been running for years, and if anyone knew how to survive, it was her. The door to the hall was just ahead. Jack could see the faint light leaking from the crack beneath it, and his feet barely made a sound on the cold floor. He could hear the guards now, shouting to each other, their boots echoing against the walls. They were gaining on them. Go. Alira's voice was sharp and urgent, and Jack didn't need to be told twice. With all his strength, he pushed forward, reaching the door just as Alira did. She pulled it open, and they both slipped through, the door shutting behind them with a soft thud. They were in another hallway, darker and even quieter than the last. Jack could feel the adrenaline still rushing through his veins, his pulse racing. His legs burned from running, but he didn't dare slow down. He had to keep up. Alira didn't stop. She kept moving, her steps quick and quiet as she led the way. Jack followed, staying close to her, trying to keep his breathing steady. He couldn't. Let his guard down, not now. They weren't safe yet. They moved through the shadows, avoiding the occasional flicker of light from overhead. Jack kept his eyes on Alira, watching the way she moved. There was something mesmerizing about her, something that made him want to trust her completely. He didn't know how she had survived all this time, but he could see the strength in her. She had been through hell and back, and yet she was still standing. After what felt like an eternity, they reached another door. Alira glanced at Jack, her eyes serious. "We're almost there," she whispered. Jack nodded, his breath still heavy. But he didn't ask any questions. He could see the determination in her face. They had come this far, and they weren't. About to turn back now, she pushed the door open, and they both slipped through, finding themselves in a narrow stairwell. The steps creaked under their weight, but they didn't slow down. Alira moved quickly, her pace steady and sure. Jack followed closely, keeping his eyes on her, trying to ignore the pounding in his chest. They reached the top of the stairs, and Jack could see a faint light from the window ahead. It was almost dawn, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to think about what lay ahead. They were almost free, almost out. But just as he was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a shout echoed from below. "There they are." A guard's voice rang out, followed by the sound of running feet. Jack's stomach dropped. They weren't safe yet. Alira's eyes flicked toward the door at the end of the hall, and she broke into a run once more, Jack right behind her. They could hear the guards getting closer, their footsteps growing louder with every passing second. Alira reached the door first, throwing it open and rushing outside. Jack followed, but as soon as he stepped into the open, he felt a chill in the air. They were outside, on the rooftop of the building, and the vastness of the city stretched out before them. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. It was beautiful, but there was no time to admire the view. Alira turned to him, her eyes scanning the area. "We need to move fast," she said, her voice tense. "They'll be out here any minute." Jack nodded, looking around for any kind of cover. There were a few ventilation ducts and large crates scattered across the rooftop, but no place to hide. They were exposed. "We need a plan," Jack said, his mind racing. They couldn't just run in any direction. They needed a way to get out of here without being caught. Alira's gaze locked onto something in the distance, and Jack followed her line of sight. There, across the rooftop, was a narrow bridge leading to another building. It wasn't far, but it was their only chance. "That's our way out," Alira said, her voice low but filled with determination. "Cross the bridge and keep going." Jack looked at her, then back at the guards who were now emerging from the door behind. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the distance. But they weren't close enough yet. "Let's go," Jack said, his voice steady. He wasn't going to let fear control him. Not now. Not when they were this close. Alira sprinted toward the bridge and Jack followed. His heart raced and his legs burned, but he pushed forward, ignoring the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. The bridge was narrow, a metal structure suspended high above the city below. One wrong step and they would fall, but there was no time to think about that. They had to keep moving. As they reached the halfway point of the bridge, Jack heard the shout of the guards behind them. They had seen them. The chase was far from over. "Faster," Alira urged, her voice cutting through the sound of the wind. She was already a few steps ahead of Jack, her focus intense. Jack's muscles screamed, but he pushed himself harder, catching up to her. They were almost at the end of the bridge when a loud crack echoed through the air. The bridge groaned for a moment. Jack thought it was just the wind, but then he saw the metal bending beneath them. The guards had set something off. The bridge was unstable. "We have to jump," Alira shouted. Without thinking, Jack followed her lead. They both leaped off the edge of the bridge, landing on a lower platform just as the structure collapsed behind them. They had made it, but as they caught their breath, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a very narrow escape and that the hardest part was still to come. They had made it off the bridge, but Jack didn't feel any sense of relief. The air around them was still heavy with tension, and the sounds of the city seemed distant, muffled by the chaos in his mind. He glanced back at the crumbling bridge. Now nothing more than a broken piece of metal suspended over the gap. They were alive, but just barely. Alira was already moving, her focus never wavering. She kept her eyes forward, her footsteps quick but deliberate as they descended further into the labyrinth of rooftops. Jack followed, trying to keep up, his mind racing. They hadn't escaped yet. This was only the beginning. The noise of the collapsing bridge had no doubt attracted attention. Jack could already hear the faint sounds of alarms in the distance, the steady thrum of the building's security systems being activated. He had no idea how long they had before the guards found their way down here, but he knew they had to keep moving. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, his voice tight from the running. "Just ahead," Alira replied, glancing over her shoulder. Her face was set in a grim expression, her brow furrowed. "There's a maintenance tunnel under the next building. It'll give us some time to regroup." Jack didn't argue. The tunnel sounded like the only chance they had. As they ran, Jack found himself growing more aware of their surroundings. They had left the rooftop behind and were now in an alleyway between two buildings, the shadows deepening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The coolness of the shadows helped him focus. Even as he fought the exhaustion creeping up on him, Alira's pace never slowed, and Jack followed suit. Every now and then she would glance behind her, always alert, always watching. "I've been running from them for years," Alira said quietly as they moved. "I've seen things. I've done things I'm not proud of, but I've always managed to survive. But this time, it's different. You're with me now." Jack could hear the weight in her voice, the vulnerability she rarely showed. It was a side of her he hadn't seen before. He could sense the fear beneath her words, and yet there was something else, something strong, something that refused to break. "We'll make it," Jack said, though he wasn't entirely sure. He believed it himself? Alira didn't answer, but she gave a small nod. A silent acknowledgement of his words. They reached the next building, an older structure with a rusted exterior. Alira paused at the corner, her eyes scanning the area. After a moment, she gestured for Jack to follow her. They approached the building's side entrance, which was hidden behind a pile of discarded crates. Alira crouched down, her fingers working quickly to unlock the door. Jack stood by, his senses alert, watching for any movement. "Almost there," Alira whispered. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside. The smell of dust and metal hit Jack's nose as they descended into the maintenance tunnel. The space was narrow and dimly lit, but it offered a brief respite from the madness above. Inside, the tunnel was quiet. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For a moment, it felt like they were safe, but he knew it wouldn't last long. They were still being hunted. They moved through the tunnel with quick, purposeful steps. Jack couldn't help but glance at Alira as they walked. She seemed different here, more at ease, more in control. It was as though this place, this hidden space, was where she felt the most alive. "Do you know where this leads?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. "How far are we from the edge of the city?" Alira nodded. "It's not far. It's a few more turns, and we'll be in an old warehouse district. From there, we can get out of the city." "That's it? It's just a few more turns?" Jack asked, a small, amused smile playing at the corner of his lips. It was hard to believe they were so close to freedom, especially after everything they had been through. Alira's lips twitched, but she didn't smile. "We'll see if it's that easy. The real challenge comes after we get out of the city. That's when we'll need to be careful." Jack nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He wasn't ready to think about what came after. He had to focus on the present. One step at a time, they moved in silence for a while, the only sound their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Jack's mind wandered, his thoughts going back to everything that had happened. He didn't know exactly what Alira had been through, but it was clear that this wasn't just some random fight. She had been running from something far bigger, far darker than anything Jack had encountered. He couldn't imagine the weight she must carry. The lives lost, the battles fought, and now he was a part of it. He glanced over at her again. "I don't know what you've been through, Alira," he said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere. I'm with you, for as long as it takes." She didn't say anything at first, but when she looked back at him, her expression softened. "Just a little. I don't want you to be, but you're already here. I'm not going to let you get hurt." Jack smiled at her words, though he knew they both understood the risks. He wasn't sure what had drawn him to this fight, what had made him trust Alira so easily. But in that moment, he realized something. It didn't matter why. It only mattered that they were in it together. They reached the end of the tunnel. Alita pushed open the door to a dimly lit alley. The streets were quiet now, the usual bustle of the city subdued. It was almost eerie, the calm before the storm. They stepped out into the alley, Jack's senses immediately on alert. There was no time to waste. They had to keep moving. Alira turned to Jack, her eyes locking with his. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady. Jack didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." They moved quickly through the alley, Alira leading the way. Jack stayed close, knowing they had little time before their enemies caught up. But for the first time in a while, Jack felt something else: hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But he also knew one thing for sure. The hardest part was still ahead. They had reached the edge of the city, but the journey wasn't over. The dim lights of the street ahead stretched out before them, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Alira led the way, her steps quiet but purposeful. Trying to match her pace, though his legs were tired from the constant running. His mind raced, wondering what they would do next, how they would make it through whatever lay ahead. They couldn't stop now. They were too close. The alleyway they had emerged from was quiet, almost too quiet. There were no signs of movement, no guards rushing toward them. But Jack wasn't fooled. They hadn't escaped yet. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every noise in the distance a reminder that they were still being hunted. Alira glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the empty streets. "We need to get out of the city before they catch up. It won't be long before they figure out where we've gone." Jack nodded. "Where exactly are we going?" "I don't know this area. There's an old outpost on the edge of the city." "It's a safe house," Alira said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We can rest there, regroup, and figure out our next move." Jack could see the determination in her eyes. She had a plan, and he trusted her. He didn't know how. She had survived all these years, but he knew she was strong. And that strength had become his own too. They walked in silence for several minutes, the tension between them building with every step. Jack's eyes kept darting around, trying to stay alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone was just waiting for them to make a mistake. Alira stopped suddenly, causing Jack to nearly bump into her. She held up a hand, signaling for him to be quiet. Jack froze, his heart racing. He didn't hear anything at first, but then he noticed a soft scraping noise, the faintest sound of footsteps. "They're close," Alira whispered, her voice low and urgent. "We need to move." Now, without waiting for a response, she turned and started moving again, faster now, her footsteps nearly silent. Jack followed closely, doing his best to keep up, to stay as quiet as possible. They turned a corner, ducking behind a row of stacked crates. The street ahead was deserted, but the danger was still there. They couldn't afford to get careless. Alira crouched low behind the crates, her eyes scanning the area. Jack did the same, glancing over at her. Her face was tense, every muscle in her body ready to spring into action. She looked like a predator, hunting for her next move. "Stay here," she whispered. "I'll go ahead and check the path. If it's clear, we move. If not, we'll find another way." Jack nodded, not trusting his voice. He knew better than to argue. He had to trust Alira, and that was something he was starting to do more. And more with every passing minute. Alira moved quickly, slipping into the shadows and disappearing from his sight. Jack stayed low, his eyes darting around, waiting for any sign of movement. He wasn't sure how much time passed, but it felt like an eternity before Alira returned. "It's clear," she whispered, appearing out of the shadows like a ghost. "We move now." Jack didn't hesitate. They were running out of time. They needed to get to that safe house. They couldn't afford to get caught now. They moved again, this time at a brisk pace, their footsteps quick but quiet. The alleyways were dark, and the streets were eerily empty. It was almost too quiet. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the silence. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Alira stopped dead in her tracks, her body tense, her eyes darting around. They found us. Without waiting for Jack to respond, Alira grabbed his arm and yanked him toward a nearby doorway. She pushed him inside, following him quickly, and closing the door behind them, they were in another small building, this one filled with old equipment and dust. It looked like a forgotten storage room, and Jack realized that's probably what it was. Alira's eyes were sharp as she listened. To the sounds outside, Jack's breath came fast, and he could hear the thumping of his own heartbeat in his ears. "Stay quiet," Alira whispered. "We're not out of this yet." They crouched low, staying hidden in the shadows. Jack could hear voices outside, the faint sound of footsteps drawing closer. His mind raced as he tried to think of a plan. They couldn't stay here forever. They had to keep moving, but where? "We'll have to make a run for it," Alira said, as if reading his mind. "But we need to wait for the right moment." Jack looked at her, his nerves on edge. "Long do you think we have?" "Not long," she replied, her voice tight. "But if we're quick, we can slip past them and make it to the outpost." Jack nodded. He didn't know what else to say. The tension was unbearable. Every minute that passed felt like another risk. They couldn't keep hiding forever. Alira stayed focused. Her eyes narrowed as she listened to the sounds outside. Jack could feel her determination, her resolve. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps outside seemed to fade. Alira's eyes flicked to Jack, and she nodded. "Now," she said. They moved swiftly, their steps light and quick. Alira led the way, Jack right behind her. They ran through the dark hallway, their breaths quick and heavy, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. They reached the back door, and Alira pushed it open. Glancing around to make sure no one was there, the street outside was empty, but they both knew that wouldn't last long. They moved quickly, staying close to the shadows, and for the first time since they'd started this escape, Jack felt a flicker of hope. They were close. But even now, Jack knew that the hardest part wasn't over yet. They still had a long way to go.